Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The city of Ikoyi, nestled in the bustling heart of Lagos, Nigeria, was renowned for its upscale neighborhoods and corporate towers piercing the skyline. It was here that the distinguished tech conglomerate, Meduaco Innovations, had its headquarters, an imposing glass-fronted building gleaming under the hot African sun. It bustled every morning with streams of employees dressed to impress, weaving in and out with determined strides, anxious to keep up with the demanding pace of corporate life in one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. Ifeoma was among them. A sharp-witted secretary in her late 20s, she possessed a calm demeanor and a bright smile that belied her intense ambition. Originally from Enugu State, she had come to Lagos with big dreams and even bigger determination. She had studied business administration at a reputable university, graduating near the top of her class. From there, her path led her to Meduaco Innovations, and in less than 2 years, she had worked her way into the confidence of the company's managing director, Mr. Benjamin Okafor. She was known for her meticulousness, color-coded filing systems, perfectly arranged desk drawers, and punctual reminders for every small detail. Everyone liked Ifeoma, and at times, she served as the unofficial office big sister, giving advice and comfort to junior staff members struggling to navigate their careers. However, Ifeoma's role was not just about sweet smiles and kind words. She was also fiercely protective of her boss's time. Gatekeeping was a significant part of her duties. She had to juggle Mr. Okafor's demanding schedule, ensuring that only the most critical visitors broke past the reception area. Given that Mr. Okafor was a busy man, constantly in and out of conferences with multinational partners, her job was anything but dull. Yet, throughout those 2 years, she had grown increasingly curious about Mr. Okafor's quirks. He was immensely successful, seemingly well put together, but behind his confident facade lingered an uneasy undercurrent of tension, a sense that he was guarding a secret far bigger than his polished suits and expensive watches suggested. Mr. Okafor was a handsome man in his mid-40s, a tall, dark, and charismatic figure with a measured tone that could silence a boardroom. He was an elegant testament to modern African business success, impeccably dressed in tailored suits from European designers, shoes that cost a small fortune, and a penchant for hosting lavish corporate events in which he seamlessly networked with foreign investors. To anyone observing from a distance, his life seemed perfect. He had a sprawling estate in Banana Island, a trophy wife who graced social media with her philanthropic endeavors, and 2 children studying abroad in the United States. Mr. Okafor had reached heights that many aspire to. But money and power, as many soon learn, do not always provide the freedom to be oneself. Ifeoma, for her part, had grown used to Mr. Okafor's perfectionism. She never questioned the emotional distance he kept from most employees, nor did she pry into the reasons behind his occasional standoffishness. She always chalked it up to the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar corporation. But that quiet Wednesday morning would upend her assumptions forever. She would discover that beneath her boss's tidy veneer lay a secret so staggering it had the potential to ruin his reputation, marriage, and even the company's standing, if word got out. On that fateful day, the office corridors were unusually empty. A heat wave had struck Lagos, and while the air conditioning remained steady inside, many employees trickled in later than usual, hoping to avoid the worst of the morning traffic. Ifeoma arrived at her usual time, 6:45 a.m., because she cherished the serenity before the day's chaos. She had tasks to complete, emails to check, and a few preliminary documents to prepare for Mr. Okafor. With coffee in hand, she made her way through the corridor, her high heels clicking on the polished marble floor. She paused outside Mr. Okafor's office to knock and let him know she was in, but she heard nothing. She assumed he had not yet arrived, so she used her master key to open the door and place the day's memos on his desk. But to her shock, Mr. Okafor was inside, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lagos's cityscape. The faint morning light cast him in silhouette, Yet it took only a moment for her to realize that he was not in his usual business suit. Instead, he wore a lacy pink bra and matching panty set, sheer enough for Ifeoma to glimpse the trembling lines of his body. Her throat went dry and her mind raced. She froze, trying to process what she was seeing, this powerful, conservative, and seemingly traditional African man dressed in women's lingerie. It was surreal, like stepping into a scene from a melodramatic Nollywood film. Mr. Okafor's head snapped around in shock. His eyes widened, and panic seized his face. In a scrambled move, he tried to cover himself with a nearby coat, but it was too late. He knew Ifeoma had seen everything. For a moment, time stood still. The air felt dense with unspoken terror. Neither of them could break the silence, each reeling from the moment of intrusion. In that suspended space, Ifeoma felt her pulse pounding in her ears, and she worried she might faint from the shock and confusion swirling inside her. Finally, Mr. Okafor regained a semblance of composure. "Ifeoma," he said, his voice faltering, "you need to knock. I can explain." His words tumbled out in a stammering, defensive rhythm, lacking the calm authority that usually defined him. Ifeoma, for her part, kept thinking she was imagining it all. But no matter how many times she blinked, the scene remained unchanged. Her boss, the distinguished and stoic mogul, was standing there clad in delicate lace undergarments. Afraid and uncertain, Ifeoma managed a shaky apology. "I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea you were here, or, she couldn't bring herself to complete her sentence. She quickly turned her back, giving Mr. Okafor the space to cover himself properly. Her mind raced with questions. Why was he wearing that? Was he? Did anyone else know? Was this some kind of therapy, or a hidden aspect of his identity? A swirl of speculation battled with her professional instincts that told her to remain calm, respectful, and discreet. Yet, even as she tried to hold onto professionalism, she couldn't ignore the ramifications. If the press got hold of this, it would be the scandal of the year. In a conservative country like Nigeria, word of a powerful, traditional businessman privately wearing women's underwear could be enough to trigger humiliating headlines and possibly threaten the stability of his empire. At that moment, Ifeoma realized the dangerous power she now held. Power she never sought, power she never asked for, but which had been thrust upon her by a single stroke of misfortune. She cleared her throat and forced herself to face him again, though she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. "I'm really sorry, sir," she repeated, not sure of what else to say. An apology for stumbling upon his secret seemed wholly inadequate, but she felt cornered by awkwardness. Mr. Okafor, perhaps sensing the precariousness of the moment, nodded slowly. He took a few steps closer, now covered by a robe he had hastily thrown on. Though the awkwardness lingered, he was clearly trying to regain his composure. The consummate businessman in him was eager to salvage the situation. "Ifeoma," he said quietly, "I need to trust that you will keep what you saw here this morning in strict confidence. It is not what you think. But even if it is, I trust you will not repeat it." His voice held a combination of fear and defiance, perhaps aware of the possible consequences if she did speak out. Ifeoma's lips parted, but she couldn't find words strong enough to reassure him. The best she could do was nod, her heart racing a mile a minute. While she nodded, her mind lingered on what such a secret could mean for the office and for her own future. She was determined to handle things discreetly, but neither she nor Mr. Okafor had any inkling of the whirlwind about to be unleashed. For now, though, this single moment, her boss in bra and panty, her own shock, and their shared silence, was enough to reshape their relationship and drag them both into an entirely new reality. The stage was set for a story more unpredictable than either of them could have imagined. Long after the initial shock subsided, the morning's events continued to ring in Ifeoma's ears. She retreated to her desk, trying to manage her tasks as usual, drafting emails, reviewing the day's appointments, and brewing a fresh pot of coffee. Yet her heart pounded, and every ring of the telephone made her flinch. In the quiet hum of the air-conditioned office, Mr. Okafor's revelation loomed large, like an unspoken tension that electrified the air. Every now and then, Ifeoma glanced toward the closed double doors of his office, wondering what he was doing and if he was still in that outfit. The entire scenario felt like a fever dream. She was spared an immediate confrontation when, around 9 a.m., the leadership team began flooding into the building for the morning board meeting. Mr. Okafor eventually emerged in a pristine black suit, hair neatly combed and carrying his usual calm demeanor. It was as if nothing had happened. He gave Ifeoma a curt nod in passing, wordlessly instructing her to direct the arriving executives to the conference room. Grateful for the temporary distraction, she threw herself into the hustle and bustle, ensuring that agendas were distributed, seating was arranged, and the projector was tested. She engaged in polite chatter with the executives who had grown to rely on her efficiency. Meanwhile, Mr. Okafor chaired the meeting with his signature composure, presenting quarterly results and future projections without a hint of personal turmoil. Yet beneath that smooth veneer, he was anything but calm. A swirling panic gnawed at him. The knowledge that Ifeoma had witnessed his most private indulgence tormented him through every line item on the meeting agenda. He tried not to let it show. Looking at him, no one would suspect a thing. That was his special talent, honed after years of high-stakes deals, negotiations, and carefully choreographed appearances. But for once in his life, he felt the foundation of his carefully curated image slipping away. After the meeting, he wrapped up the final pleasantries, shaking hands and exchanging polite jokes with the board. As everyone filtered out, Ifeoma remained behind, collecting stray documents and turning off the projector. Mr. Okafor lingered, clearing his throat as if he wanted her attention. Carefully, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ifeoma," he said in a low, steady voice, "we need to discuss earlier. Please, come to my office as soon as you're done here." She nodded mutely, feeling a chill creep over her. Less than 15 minutes later, Ifeoma stepped into Mr. Okafor's office again. This time, she made certain to knock. When she entered, he was pacing behind his desk, clearly agitated. The blinds were drawn, bathing the room in a subdued glow. He gestured for her to sit, and she did so, crossing her legs in an attempt to appear composed. Mr. Okafor lowered himself into the large leather chair behind his imposing mahogany desk. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he broke it with a deep sigh. "Ifeoma," he began, "I know that you saw me in a compromised state." He paused, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I won't insult your intelligence by making excuses. But I need you to understand that certain aspects of my private life must remain exactly that, private." Ifeoma observed him, her mind racing. She found her voice in a calm, measured tone, perhaps surprising even herself. "Sir, I want you to know I have no intention of gossiping about this. It's not my place to judge or share. I understand that your personal life is your own, and He lifted a hand, cutting her off gently. "I appreciate that, Ifeoma. But talk is cheap in Lagos. Once gossip starts, it travels like wildfire. If one person hears a rumor, the entire city knows by the end of the week, especially a rumor of this magnitude." He rose from his chair, walked to the window, and pulled the blinds back a fraction. Sunlight spilled in, and he stared at the congested street below, perhaps imagining how quickly this secret could spread among the people hurrying about their day. "I will be frank, Ifeoma. My position, my family, and my business can't survive a scandal like this, especially in the eyes of conservative investors and the public. The repercussions would be catastrophic, both professionally and personally." Though she'd had no intention of betraying him, Ifeoma felt uneasy. The gravity of his words made her pulse quicken. She shifted in her seat, lacing her fingers. I understand, sir," she replied carefully. "But I don't know what you expect of me. I truly won't say anything." He turned to face her, then approached his desk once again. Slowly he unlocked a drawer and pulled out a small black folder. Opening it, he extracted a check, its surface reflecting the white fluorescent light. He cleared his throat, deliberately avoiding her eyes as he scribbled a figure. Sliding the check across the desk toward her, he spoke with a hushed urgency. "This is $30 million in a private offshore account. Once you deposit this check, that amount is yours, No questions asked. Ifeoma's eyes darted from Mr. Okafor's face to the check. The number on the slip of paper was astronomical, more money than she could ever dream of making in her lifetime. Her mind spun with shock, and she felt her hands begin to tremble. She forced herself to take a breath. Sir, $30 million? That's an outrageous sum. Are you sure this is the best way to handle this? I wasn't planning to. He cut her off again, this time more assertively. Take it, Ifeoma. I don't want to hear any argument. I am a rich man, and this is a small price to pay for my peace of mind and my family's security. Consider it a severance package, if you will. You can leave the company tomorrow, you'll never need to work again. And all I ask is that you keep this matter to yourself forever. The weight of his request fell on her like an avalanche. She stared at him, feeling a swirl of disbelief, gratitude, and even fear. The moral implications alone were dizzying. On one hand, she had come to Lagos to find success and stability for her entire family back in Enugu. This kind of money could wipe away generations of hardship. On the other hand, it was hush money, plain and simple, and accepting it would make her complicit in whatever hidden truth Mr. Okafor was trying to bury. She realized that from this moment forward, her life was no longer simple. The path ahead branched into complicated moral terrain. Ifeoma let her gaze wander to the large portrait behind Mr. Okafor's desk, an imposing image of the man himself, arms folded, wearing a confident smile. She remembered all the time she had admired him, the self-made African mogul who could stand toe-to-toe with international giants. Now, the cost of that polished image was being laid at her feet, and it came with a price tag bigger than any bribe she had ever imagined. She forced her voice to remain steady. Mr. Okafor, she said softly, I don't need that much money to keep quiet. Truly, I am not one of those people who betray confidences. He shook his head. I insist. If you reject it, you will still carry the power to destroy me with a single rumor. I am not taking chances. This is business, and I always pay for services rendered. Your silence is a service, one I value immensely. Her stomach roiled with conflict. Part of her wanted to fling the check back at him, outraged by the assumption that she could be bought. Another part reminded her of the neglected farmland in Enugu, the father who needed expensive medical treatment, the younger siblings who yearned for the chance to study abroad. The weight of those familial responsibilities pressed heavily against her moral qualms. She closed her eyes, envisioning her mother's eyes lighting up at the prospect of a better life, medical bills paid, no more scrounging for money. Finally, her eyes fluttered open, and she nodded once, a slow, reluctant nod. She slid the check from the table, but she did not look at it again. All right, sir, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I accept. Mr. Okafor's shoulders sagged in relief. He nodded, then sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. You made the right choice, he murmured. I'll have the legal team draft a simple non-disclosure agreement. No complicated terms, just your signature that you will never discuss what you saw. And in return, he gestured to the check. I thank you for being discreet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Ifeoma carefully rose from her seat. She clutched the check as though it might vanish. She gave Mr. Okafor one last, searching look. Suddenly she felt she was looking at a stranger. Good day, sir, she said quietly, unsure what else could be said, and turned to leave. As she walked out of the office, her mind reeled. She was now a secret keeper of the highest order, complicit in concealing Mr. Okafor's private truth from an unforgiving world. She had never felt more uneasy in her life. Yet the magnitude of her family's needs overshadowed her guilt, and she couldn't help the small surge of gratitude that welled up. In a twist of fate, she had become a millionaire overnight, albeit under circumstances she never could have foreseen. Little did she know that this was only the calm before the real storm, a storm that would shake both her and Mr. Okafor to their very cores. The following day, Ifeoma resigned from Maduko Innovations under the guise of seeking new challenges. The official statement circulated internally contained warm wishes from Mr. Okafor, praising her for her loyalty and diligence. Colleagues were taken aback by the suddenness of it all, But corporate life in Lagos often saw abrupt comings and goings. No one questioned it too deeply, they simply assumed she had been offered a lucrative opportunity elsewhere. With her final paycheck in hand, plus that mind-boggling offshore check for $30 million, Ifeoma left the building that had dominated 2 years of her professional life. She walked out with her head high, even if her soul felt uneasy. She told herself that this was a blessing, an opportunity. But a small voice inside kept reminding her that hush money was a dangerous gift, capable of entangling her in unforeseen problems. For the next week, she secluded herself in her modest one-bedroom apartment in Surulere, too anxious to celebrate publicly. She rationalized that she needed time to plan, to think about how to handle so much money without drawing too much attention. In Nigeria, news traveled fast, and no one needed to know she had become insanely wealthy overnight. Carefully, she used a trusted financial advisor, an older cousin who worked in banking, to guide her in setting up discreet investments. But even that required a half-truth, some made-up story about a foreign investor friend. She avoided face-to-face meetings, mindful of the rising suspicion that might follow. Although she had tried to distance herself from Madueko Innovations and Mr. Okafor's secret, fate had other plans. Tragedy struck 3 days after she left. A catastrophic fire engulfed the top floors of the Madueko Innovations headquarters. The blaze began in the server room, an electrical fault triggering a chain reaction that saw flames licking up the walls before the fire alarms even detected the smoke. By the time the fire service arrived, half of the top floor was ablaze, thick black smoke billowing over the Lagos skyline. The news channels and social media erupted with live streams and frantic updates. Helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of employees racing down emergency stairwells, coughing and choking on acrid smoke. Sirens wailed as ambulances and firefighters battled the inferno. Ifeoma saw the images on TV and felt her chest tighten. Madueko Innovations had once been her daily world. She watched in horror as newscasters reported injuries, and worse, a handful of fatalities among the employees who couldn't evacuate in time. In the chaos of the moment, Mr. Okafor was nowhere to be seen on the news. Rumors began circulating that he had been trapped inside his private office. Others said he was out of the country. Tension mounted on Twitter and WhatsApp groups, with conflicting reports swirling faster than they could be confirmed. Late that night, a somber press release from the Lagos State Fire Service confirmed that among the injured was indeed Mr. Okafor, found unconscious in a smoke-filled corridor. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Ifeoma's heart plunged. She hadn't wanted anything like this to happen. Never mind that she was no longer an employee, she still cared about the people there, and Mr. Okafor in particular. Despite the bizarre circumstances of her departure, she found her chest clenching with worry. Without hesitation, she grabbed a taxi and headed for Lagos University Teaching Hospital, where Mr. Okafor was rumored to be receiving treatment. The reception area was a melee of concerned family members, frantic phone calls, and journalists angling for a story. Ifeoma tried to keep a low profile in the waiting area, but it wasn't long before she recognized one of Mr. Okafor's executive assistants, a tall, slim man named Toyosi, who had always been friendly toward her. With tears in his eyes, Toyosi told her that Mr. Okafor was in the intensive care unit, suffering from severe smoke inhalation and second-degree burns on his arms. The doctors had sedated him, and no visitors were allowed except immediate family. But Mr. Okafor's wife and children were still abroad, and attempts to contact them had been hampered by time zone differences and phone issues. Although Ifeoma had no official business being there, she couldn't bring herself to leave. She sat in a plastic chair in the corridor, adrenaline still coursing through her. Eventually, Toyosi worked some magic with the nursing staff, and Ifeoma was allowed a brief visit under the guise of being a close family friend. Nervously, she entered the dimly lit ICU room, hearing the steady beep of the heart monitor. Mr. Okafor lay motionless, an oxygen mask strapped over his mouth, bandages covering his arms. Even in this vulnerable state, he looked larger than life somehow. Emotions churned inside Ifeoma. She remembered him offering her the hush money, the desperation in his eyes. Her mind wandered to the secret only the two of them shared. She found herself whispering, "Sir, Please be strong. We still have matters that remain between us. I never wanted this to happen. She left the hospital shaken, uncertain of how to proceed. The hush money had seemed like a solution, but now everything felt entangled in tragedy. As she took a taxi back to her apartment, questions gnawed at her. Should she keep tabs on Mr. Okafor's recovery? Was she obliged to do something more, given the unusual bond they now shared? Or should she vanish, letting fate handle the rest? That night she barely slept. Her phone buzzed with texts from concerned ex-colleagues, all reeling from the disaster. The next morning she learned that 4 employees had perished in the fire, and more than a dozen were hospitalized. Mr. Okafor remained in critical condition, listed as stable but unresponsive. The entire city of Lagos was abuzz with shock and sympathy. Maduako Innovations had been a beacon of corporate success, and now its future lay in limbo. Haunted by guilt, Ifeoma decided to return to the hospital to see how she could help. She arrived to find the corridor quiet but tense. Tosi was there, exhausted, but relieved to see her. He explained that Mr. Okafor's wife had finally made contact. She was rushing back from the United States, but would not arrive until the following day. In the meantime, Mr. Okafor's condition had neither improved nor worsened, an ambiguous sign that left doctors puzzled. Ifeoma's eyes wandered to the small window that looked into Mr. Okafor's ICU room. Seeing him so helpless felt surreal. This man who had once towered over board meetings, so assured and powerful, was now an ailing patient fighting for his life. She wondered if he would ever fully recover, physically or mentally. The swirling guilt in her stomach grew heavier. Yes, she'd done nothing to cause the fire, but she couldn't shake the sense that the universe was punishing them both for the moral compromise they had made. She sat next to Toyosi, who recounted the frantic minutes of the fire. He mentioned how the staff tried to reach Mr. Okafor, but the thick smoke had blocked them from accessing his office. Eventually, firefighters found him collapsed in the hallway. Ifeoma's hand flew to her mouth, imagining the terror he must have felt, trapped and alone, with his secrets locked inside him. She thought about her own predicament. She was now effectively a multimillionaire in hush money, but her conscience felt scorched as well. She decided to stay there for the next few days, at least until Mr. Okafor's wife arrived. During that time, she offered help where she could, buying lunch for anxious employees, consoling staff who had lost friends in the fire. Most people welcomed her presence, remembering her past kindness. They did not suspect that behind her nurturing spirit lay a moral burden, or that she possessed knowledge that could shake their perception of Mr. Okafor forever. Finally, on the 4th day after the fire, the doctors announced that Mr. Okafor was out of immediate danger. He was still weak, but he had regained partial consciousness. Ifeoma was in the waiting area when a nurse informed her that Mr. Okafor had asked to see her by name. Surprised and anxious, she followed the nurse into the room. The bandaged figure on the bed turned slightly when she entered, his eyes half-lidded. He tried to speak, voice muffled under the oxygen mask. She leaned in, struggling to decipher his raspy words. "Thank you for coming," he said weakly, each syllable a labor. "Needed to see you." Ifeoma swallowed back tears. She reached for his unbandaged hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm here, sir," she replied. "You're going to be all right?" His eyes flickered with a faint glimmer of relief. For a moment, Ifeoma wondered if he was recalling their shared secret. But he said nothing more, simply drifting back into a sedated sleep. In those few words, however, Ifeoma felt the weight of their bond deepen, like invisible chains linking their fates. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, one thing was clear: she could no longer pretend this was just about hush money. Their lives were now inextricably intertwined by tragedy and a secret that could destroy them both if revealed. As the weeks passed, Maduako Innovations struggled to regain its footing. The charred floors required extensive renovation, and a cloud of grief lingered among staff who had lost colleagues in the devastating fire. Nevertheless, business had to go on, shareholders expected results, and clients needed reassurance. Temporary offices were set up in a different wing of the same building, while Mr. Okafor convalesced in a private hospital suite. Though still weak, he insisted on being looped in on strategic decisions, displaying a resilience that many found admirable. Ifeoma hovered in the periphery. Officially, she was no longer part of the company, but her presence was far from inconspicuous. She visited Mr. Okafor almost daily, bringing local homemade meals for the staff on duty or gently reading out financial updates so he could keep track of the business from his hospital bed. By then, his wife and 2 teenage children had arrived, setting up camp in an adjacent suite. While they were civil toward Ifeoma, thanking her for her help, she felt their unspoken questions. Why was a former secretary who had resigned suddenly so dedicated? The tension was palpable, but no one voiced it out loud. In a society where elder respect and politeness were key, they chose to observe rather than confront. Gradually, Mr. Okafor's condition improved enough for him to speak normally. Bandages were replaced by fresh dressings, and he was able to take short walks along the hospital corridor. Ifeoma joined him occasionally, steadying his arm. Each time they passed other patients or hospital staff, she felt watchful eyes, but no one openly commented. Such closeness between a wealthy, married man and a young woman inevitably raised eyebrows, but the hush of the hospital corridors offered them a semblance of privacy. One afternoon, they sat in a quiet corner of the hospital garden, a small oasis of greenery amid Lagos's concrete sprawl. The sun filtered through palm fronds, and the scent of hibiscus blossoms mingled with the antiseptic odor drifting from the corridors. Mr. Okafor leaned on a cane as he walked, moving more slowly than before. He paused to catch his breath on a wooden bench, and Ifeoma carefully sat beside him. "Thank you for staying by my side, Ifeoma," he said, voice subdued yet brimming with gratitude. "You've shown more care and concern than some of my closest business associates." She offered a small smile. "I couldn't just leave you in this state. Despite everything, I still feel responsible somehow. Maybe it's silly, but I do." He studied her with tired eyes. "What do you mean, responsible? You did nothing wrong." Ifeoma gazed at the blossoming hibiscus, struggling to articulate the swirl of emotions. "It's not so straightforward, sir. I feel like the hush money we arranged, maybe it was a sign that something was amiss in our lives. As if the universe decided to punish us for our secrecy." Mr. Okafor's brows furrowed. "Ifeoma, you can't blame yourself for an electrical fire. It's a terrible tragedy, but it was an accident. And yet," she continued gently, "our secret, your secret, still lingers. I accepted money that I never earned in a fair sense. I try to use it for good, help my family, but each time I look at the wire transfer confirmations, I feel uneasy. And do you still dress in that way?" He exhaled heavily, a mixture of shame and resolve crossing his features. "Yes," he admitted, lowering his voice. "Not often, not lately, but it's part of who I am. Has been for a long time. I was taught that a successful African man must always be strong, stoic, unwavering. But deep inside, there's this part of me that finds solace in feminine attire. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not something I can switch off." Ifeoma nodded, empathy shining in her eyes. "I don't judge you, sir. Maybe the outside world would, but I've come to see that we're all complicated beings. And we're in Nigeria, a place where tradition and modernity clash every day. People expect certain behaviors from a man in your position. But behind closed doors, everyone battles something." He turned his gaze skyward, as if searching for answers in the drifting clouds. "I can't come out with it, Ifeoma. It would ruin my family, my reputation, my business. The only reason I survived the scandal of that fire is because I'm still seen as a traditional, respectable family man. If the truth got out now, everything I built would crumble." Ifeoma placed a hand gently on his. "Your secret is safe with me. I meant it when I said I would keep silent. But you need to find a way to be at peace with yourself, sir. That hush money may have solved the immediate fear, but it hasn't solved the deeper conflict. This is about your identity, not just a public image." A tear glistened at the corner of Mr. Okafor's eye, a rare display of vulnerability for a man conditioned to never show weakness. "You're right," he whispered, "but one problem at a time. First, I need to recover and rebuild Maduako Innovations. Then, maybe I can figure out how to address who I am." Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Mr. Okafor's wife, Grace, a graceful woman with a dignified bearing. She approached wearing a crisp blouse and a long flowing skirt. Her face carried lines of concern that spoke of sleepless nights. "Ah, there you are," she said politely, her eyes flicking between them. "I've been looking for you. The doctor said it's time for your next checkup." Mr. Okafor nodded, passing the cane into his other hand. He rose slowly, leaning on Ifeoma's arm. Grace watched them with that same hint of curiosity and wariness, but if she suspected anything, she kept it hidden behind a practiced mask of propriety. Together, they walked back toward the main building, the moment of intimacy in the garden floating away on the warm afternoon breeze. It was in the hospital corridor, near the nurse's station, that an unpredictable turn of events occurred. A stern-faced man in a tailored navy suit strode toward them, flanked by two others in casual attire. The man introduced himself as Detective Lawal from the Lagos State Criminal Investigation Department. The detective explained that while the fire was initially presumed electrical, there were now grounds to suspect possible foul play. Certain forensic evidence indicated that the blaze might have been started with an accelerant, and the timing coincided with some questionable internal activities at Meduaco Innovations. Mr. Okafor visibly tensed, his grip tightening around the cane. Grace's eyes widened, and she pressed a protective hand against her husband's shoulder. Ifeoma felt her own heart rate spike. Could it be that someone intentionally tried to kill Mr. Okafor, or sabotage the company? "Mr. Okafor," Detective Lawal said, "I'm sorry to disturb you during your recovery, but we need to investigate all possibilities. We have to consider if there were any disgruntled employees or business rivals who might have had a motive to start this fire. We'd appreciate your full cooperation." Mr. Okafor exchanged glances with his wife, then looked toward Ifeoma. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if the hush money fiasco or his cross-dressing could be linked to blackmail or sabotage. Anxiety coiled in the pit of her stomach. Mr. Okafor composed himself, drawing on his reserves of dignity and willpower. "Certainly, Detective," he said, voice steadier than before. "I'll cooperate fully. However, as you can see, my health is still fragile. May I request some time to stabilize before any intense questioning?" Detective Lawal nodded. "Of course. We're not here to pressure you in your current state. We only ask that you provide any relevant records or insights that might help our investigation." With that, the detective and his men departed. Ifeoma exchanged anxious looks with Mr. Okafor and Grace. None of them voiced their fears out loud, but the tension in the air was palpable. The possibility of arson introduced a fresh wave of uncertainty. If someone had deliberately set that fire, what else might they be capable of, and was Mr. Okafor's secret part of their leverage? Late that evening, Ifeoma received an unexpected phone call from a blocked number. She answered hesitantly, only to hear a distorted voice instructing her to tell your boss he's not safe, before the line went dead. A chill ran down her spine. She tried calling back, but there was no signal. Panicked, she called Mr. Okafor, who answered in a groggy voice. When she relayed the message, his silence told her all she needed to know. The hush money and the cross-dressing secret were no longer their only worries. Something sinister lurked in the shadows, threatening to unravel everything. The next week unfurled like a suspenseful Nollywood thriller. Detective Lawal and his team began conducting interviews with employees, scrutinizing financial documents, and analyzing camera footage from the day of the fire. Rumors swirled that a particular disgruntled executive, rumored to have been on the verge of termination, might have orchestrated the fire to hide evidence of embezzlement. Other whispers pointed to outside corporate rivals aiming to sabotage Meduaco Innovations. The swirling theories left everyone on edge, fueling paranoia that the culprit might be hiding in plain sight. Still recovering in the hospital, Mr. Okafor delegated day-to-day operations to a trusted circle of senior managers. Even from his hospital bed, he dialed into conference calls and personally supervised the reconstruction budget. Grace took a more visible role in the company's philanthropic arm, organizing fundraisers for the families of those who perished in the fire. Despite the tragedy, life kept churning forward, and in a show of solidarity, employees rallied together, determined to see Meduaco Innovations survive this crisis. Ifeoma found herself stepping into a role she never anticipated. Although no longer officially employed by the company, her loyalty and discreet nature made her invaluable. She became a point of liaison between Mr. Okafor and the staff still grappling with grief and uncertainty. Often, she served as Mr. Okafor's eyes and ears, reporting any suspicious activity or rumors that might pertain to the ongoing investigation. The hush money weighed heavily on her conscience, but she also felt a sense of responsibility toward the man she had once assisted daily. A man who, for all his faults, had shown her kindness and trust in his own guarded way. Matters took an unexpected turn when, one afternoon, Ifeoma received a hand-delivered envelope at her apartment. The contents chilled her. Inside was a single photograph, capturing Mr. Okafor in his pink bra and panty, the image taken from a low angle that suggested a hidden camera. Across the photograph, scrawled in red marker, was a message: "We know. Pay more or the world sees the truth." Her hand shook as she turned the photograph over, searching for any other clues. The envelope contained no return address, and the paper smelled faintly of cheap perfume. Ifeoma's mind raced. Who could have taken this photograph? The angle suggested it was captured inside Mr. Okafor's office. Could it have been installed by someone in maintenance or security? She quickly tore the photo to pieces, but her anxiety skyrocketed, her thoughts spinning in a frenzied loop. Without delay, she rushed to the hospital. Mr. Okafor was awake, flipping through recovery exercises in bed. When Ifeoma showed him the photograph's remnants and relayed the threat, his complexion grew ashen. Even Grace, who had been quietly praying in the corner, gasped at the implication. Mr. Okafor pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. "This can't be happening. How would they even have a camera in my office?" Ifeoma closed the door, ensuring no one else was in earshot. "I don't know, sir. But it seems someone knew about your—" She hesitated, glancing at Grace. "Someone knew and documented it. The message demands additional payment. They might also be involved in the fire, or at least using it to blackmail you." Grace's eyes flicked to her husband, wide with confusion. "Benjamin, I'm not sure I understand. The photograph? We need to handle this carefully. We can't let them blackmail us indefinitely." At that moment, Mr. Okafor's phone buzzed, displaying a strange number. He picked it up, putting it on speaker. An electronically modified voice filtered through the line. "Mr. Okafor," it began, "by now, you've seen our message. We have more pictures and even videos. Pay us $50 million within 72 hours, or we release everything to the press." Imagine the headlines: "Lagos tycoon exposed in women's lingerie. Your empire will crumble. We'll be in touch with details on where to wire the money." Before Mr. Okafor could protest or threaten legal action, the line went dead. Grace collapsed into the chair beside the hospital bed, tears trickling down her cheeks. Ifeoma stared at the phone, her mind a swirl of alarm and pity. Meanwhile, Mr. Okafor seemed to shrink into himself, burdened by a despair deeper than the physical injuries he was healing from. He closed his eyes and spoke in a defeated tone. "I can't let them release that footage. My career, my family reputation, everything would be destroyed. Even the suspicion alone would ruin me. No one will trust me after that." Grace found her voice, shaky but resolute. "Benjamin, we should go to the police. This is blackmail, plain and simple." Mr. Okafor's eyes snapped open, filled with panic. "And then what?" "The police will want copies of the pictures and videos as evidence. Even if the blackmailers are caught, how long before those images leak anyway? Do you think the authorities here can protect such sensitive information from the press? In Lagos of all places?" Ifeoma nodded in grim agreement. Data leaks and corruption were sadly not unheard of, especially when a high-profile figure was involved. She recalled the detective's recent revelation that the fire might have been intentional. Now this blackmail. Clearly, someone was orchestrating a systematic campaign to destroy Mr. Okafor's life from every angle. As the clock ticked on the 72-hour deadline, tension skyrocketed. Even within the hospital's sterile corridors, Mr. Okafor's every move felt laced with danger. The blackmailers would likely provide instructions for a wire transfer soon, and Mr. Okafor debated paying them simply to buy time. Yet Grace and Ifeoma both argued that acquiescing to the demand would be a never-ending cycle. Once blackmailers knew he would pay, they could demand more in the future. In this spiral of uncertainty, a surprising ally emerged, Detective Lawal. Although Mr. Okafor was initially reluctant to confide in him, Ifeoma reasoned that if the detective suspected arson, the blackmail might be related. Eventually, Mr. Okafor agreed to a private meeting with Lawal, away from prying eyes. They convened in a small consultation room in the hospital's basement level. The detective listened intently as Mr. Okafor, with great reluctance, revealed the blackmail, though he carefully skirted the specific nature of the photographs. Detective Lawal tapped a pen on the table, his expression thoughtful. "It's clear that someone close to your inner circle is behind this," he said. "The camera in your office suggests inside access. The timing of the blackmail, coinciding with the fire investigation, is too convenient to be a coincidence. I suspect they planned the fire to throw the company into chaos, then used your vulnerability to extort money." Mr. Okafor's jaw clenched. "But who would stoop so low? I've treated my employees well, paid them above industry standards. My board members are like family. I've been careful. I never suspected anyone knew about my personal preferences, aside from Ifeoma, and I trust her completely." Lawal nodded. "Sometimes betrayal comes from places we least expect. I suggest we set up a sting operation. We can track the money transfer, see who tries to collect. But you'll need to cooperate fully and keep a tight lid on this. If word gets out, the blackmailer might go underground." Though he was torn, Mr. Okafor eventually agreed. A plan took shape. They would wait for the blackmailer's instructions, and once Mr. Okafor prepared the payment, police cyberforensics would trace the route of the funds. The arrangement carried enormous risk. If the blackmailer got suspicious, they might release the incriminating footage instantly. But it was a gamble Mr. Okafor felt compelled to take. He was done living in fear, done letting shadows dictate his fate. At midnight, the blackmailer called again. This time, the instructions were precise. The money was to be transferred to an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet, after which an anonymous messenger would confirm receipt. If the blackmailer deemed everything satisfactory, they might consider withholding the footage. But the voice made it clear, any hint of law enforcement, and the deal was off, with catastrophic consequences for Mr. Okafor's reputation. Unbeknownst to the blackmailer, the police cyber team had rigged Mr. Okafor's laptop with specialized tracking software. The moment he initiated the crypto transfer, the software would attempt to trace the blackmailer's digital footprints, pinpointing their servers or at least narrowing down the location. If successful, it could unmask the culprit. But such an operation hinged on split-second precision and a bit of luck. Cybercriminals were often adept at hiding behind layers of encryption and routing nodes. The day of the transfer dawned with ominous quiet. Mr. Okafor, still physically weakened, sat propped up in his hospital bed, laptop open. His wife stood next to him, a hand on his shoulder, while Ifeoma hovered in the background, phone in hand, eyes darting between the door and the screen. Detective Lawal and his tech team were situated in a hidden room down the corridor, communicating via secure earpieces. With trembling fingers, Mr. Okafor keyed in the amounts, hearts pounding in sync with every keystroke. This was the moment of truth. Would the blackmailer's identity be revealed, or would they vanish into the digital ether, $50 million richer? A hush filled the room as Mr. Okafor hit send. The transaction soared into the blockchain, an irreversible act. Seconds felt like hours. Ifeoma held her breath, checking for any message from the blackmailer, while Grace softly whispered a prayer in Igbo, pleading for divine intervention. Then the phone rang, the caller ID hidden. Everyone stiffened. Mr. Okafor answered, voice hoarse. "It's done," he said simply. A crackle of static, then the eerie, modified voice. "We see the payment. Don't be clever. You'll receive instructions soon. If you make it through the next few hours without any stunts, maybe you'll keep your dirty secret." The line went dead. Little did the blackmailer know that in a room down the hall, Detective Lawal's team had started shouting excitedly. They had found something, an IP address, a location, a possible link. The net was tightening around the faceless enemy who had orchestrated so much havoc. Whether or not the blackmailer realized the trap they had just walked into would soon be revealed. For Ifeoma, Mr. Okafor, and everyone else caught in this twisting saga, the next few hours would prove decisive. One way or another, the storm of secrets, tragedies, and betrayals would soon reach its climax. Night fell heavily over the city of Lagos. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and sporadic flashes of lightning lit up the skyline. In the private hospital suite, tension mounted as everyone waited for news from Detective Lawal's team. Mr. Okafor sat upright, biting his lips so hard he nearly drew blood. Grace paced by the window, glancing at her phone every few seconds. Ifeoma leaned against the wall, arms folded protectively across her chest. The hum of the air conditioner was the only constant sound, punctuating the hush that had settled like a weight in the room. Finally, near midnight, Detective Lawal burst in, eyes alight with urgency. Behind him trailed two uniformed officers, their expressions set. "We have a lead," he announced, keeping his voice low to maintain some sense of privacy in the hallway. "The funds were partially routed through a shell corporation. Our tech team traced it back to an IP address associated with someone in your own company's security division. One of your high-ranking executives is behind this." Mr. Okafor's eyes went wide. "Who?" he croaked. Lawal hesitated before producing a small folder. Inside was a headshot photograph of none other than Lanra Adeyemi, a senior security consultant Mr. Okafor had hired a year ago, recommended by a former colleague. Lanra was praised for his top-notch digital security expertise. He was rumored to have once worked in cybersecurity in the United Kingdom before returning to Nigeria. Mr. Okafor's face contorted in disbelief. "Lanra? Are you sure? I trusted him with our most sensitive data." Lawal nodded grimly. "Yes, and that's exactly how he had the opportunity to plant hidden cameras in your office. He would have had unrestricted access under the guise of strengthening company security. Our evidence indicates he orchestrated the fire too, though possibly with outside help, hoping to cover his tracks and force you into a vulnerable position." A surge of rage flashed across Mr. Okafor's usually composed features. He struggled to maintain his composure as Grace pressed a comforting hand against his shoulder. "We have to stop him," she said quietly. "No more blackmail, no more secrets." Detective Lawal laid out the next step. A sting operation, a carefully coordinated confrontation. Lanra had sent instructions for a final handover of the blackmail evidence, presumably to ensure Mr. Okafor wouldn't come after him. If all went according to plan, Lanra would appear at a designated location, a small airstrip on the outskirts of Lagos, where Mr. Okafor, or his representative, would officially receive the footage. The plan was for the police to intercept Lanra red-handed. Yet the situation remained volatile. Lanra could still release the images digitally at any moment. Despite still feeling weak, Mr. Okafor insisted on going to the rendezvous point personally. "I need to face him," he said, voice firm. Grace and Ifeoma tried to dissuade him, worried for his health and safety, but he refused to budge. It was a matter of principle, he argued, and he would not let fear control him anymore. Finally, they reached a compromise. Mr. Okafor would go, but he would wear a discreet bulletproof vest, and Lawal's team would remain nearby to make the arrest. In the early hours of the morning, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles and Mr. Okafor's tinted SUV slipped out of the city, heading toward the abandoned airstrip. The storm had subsided, leaving puddles on the dirt roads. Humid air clung to every breath, and the silhouettes of palm trees rustled eerily in the dim moonlight. Ifeoma rode with Mr. Okafor, the hush money deal and the entire fiasco replaying in her mind like a grim highlight reel. She glanced at him, pale, bandaged, but resolute. Whatever his personal secrets, he possessed a core of undeniable courage. Upon arrival, the group positioned themselves strategically. Lawal's men took cover behind the rusted remains of old cargo containers, armed and ready. Mr. Okafor stood in an open clearing, leaning slightly on his cane, every nerve in his body thrumming with tension. Ifeoma remained behind in the SUV, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The only sound was the distant drone of frogs and crickets, accentuated by the sporadic flicker of a failing floodlight. Suddenly, headlights pierced the darkness. A dark sedan rolled up, and out stepped Lanra Adeyemi. He looked oddly casual in jeans and a fitted shirt, but the glint in his eyes revealed a man who believed he had the upper hand. Under his arm, he carried a sleek black briefcase. He stepped forward, stopping a few meters from Mr. Okafor. "Benjamin," Lanra said, voice smooth. "I see you're recovering. Sorry about the fire, things got a bit out of hand. But you should thank me, I could have left you in there to burn. Instead, I made sure you'd be rescued, though not before you suffered a bit." Mr. Okafor's grip tightened on the cane. "You nearly killed innocent people, Lanra. 4 of my employees died. You used me, betrayed me. And for what? Money?" Lanra snorted, setting the briefcase down. "Moneys, but also power. You men of influence think you can hide your sins behind polished doors. I found out about your little cross-dressing fetish months ago. Quite the closet you've got there. I realized I could ruin you, or make you pay handsomely to avoid ruin. The fire was insurance, a surefire way to cause chaos and ensure you'd comply. People died? That's unfortunate collateral damage." Mr. Okafor's body trembled with anger. "You'll pay for that. All of it?" Lanra shrugged. "Doubtful. The police in Lagos? Please. I have multiple safe houses, offshore accounts. If you're planning some grand betrayal, think again. In exactly 10 minutes, if I'm not free and clear, an associate of mine will upload all your pictures and videos to the internet. Then watch how quickly your empire collapses." He popped open the briefcase, revealing several thumb drives and a mobile device. "Now, I'm a man of my word. You want the originals? Here they are. I'll even delete the backups if you behave. Otherwise, it's showtime for your secret life, Okafor. Hand me the final portion of the payment, another $20 million, and we never speak again." Unknown to Lanra, Detective Lawal had a vantage point and was already triangulating the signal from the phone in the briefcase. The plan hinged on Lanra not suspecting the presence of the police. Mr. Okafor took a shaky step forward, as if about to comply. Just then, from the corner of his vision, Lanra spotted a faint reflection, a uniformed officer shifting position behind a container. His eyes widened, realization dawning. "You tricked me," he hissed, snatching the phone. "I'll release it now. You've got no time to—" A thunderous shout broke the silence. "Drop it, Lanra. Police!" Shots rang out, echoing through the night as the officers lunged. Lanra managed to tap his phone screen once, then tried to bolt toward his sedan. But a swift tackle from one of Lawal's men brought him crashing to the ground. In the scuffle, the phone skittered across the tarmac. When the dust settled, Lanra was pinned face down, cursing. Lawal sprinted over, retrieving the phone and a battered laptop from the sedan. "We got him, Mr. Okafor," the detective yelled. But Mr. Okafor's gaze was fixed on the phone screen. A single text read, "Upload in progress. 34%. If that upload finished, the entire stash of incriminating evidence would go live." Ifeoma dashed out of the SUV, heart hammering. She scooped up the phone, desperately toggling through the open apps. Lanra fought against his restraints, spitting in rage. "You can't stop it. It's a direct link to my associate server. Once it hits 100%, game over." Frantic, Ifeoma turned to Detective Lawal. "We need to cut the data connection. Now." Lawal whipped out a small signal jammer from his vest, the same device they'd prepared in anticipation of a worst-case scenario. He activated it, flooding the immediate radius with interference. The phone's upload status froze at 73%. A wave of relief surged through Ifeoma as the progress bar refused to move. Lanra screamed in frustration. "No, no, no. That data was your downfall. You can't." Lawal tightened the cuffs, leading him away while his men secured the area. "We'll see how chatty you get down at the station," he muttered. Within minutes, additional squad cars arrived to cordon off the airstrip. Mr. Okafor, breath shuddering, sank to his knees on the damp ground. Ifeoma hurried to his side, steadying him while Grace emerged to cradle his shoulders. In that cathartic moment, tears gathered in Mr. Okafor's eyes. The haunting possibility of total public exposure receded as swiftly as it had arrived. Although the threat was not entirely gone, Lanra's mention of an associate and multiple backups meant more challenges could lie ahead. Tonight's crisis was averted. Over the ensuing weeks, thorough investigations uncovered that Lanra had indeed orchestrated the scheme for blackmail and sabotage. His associate was traced, arrested, and the backups of the incriminating images were destroyed. Detective Lawal, in a rare press conference, declared Maduko Innovations exonerated from wrongdoing in the fire. The catastrophic blaze was now categorized as arson, and those responsible were in custody. Behind the scenes, Mr. Okafor quietly settled the families of the fire's victims, providing compensation and scholarships for the bereaved children. Reconstruction began in earnest, with employees returning to work with renewed loyalty. Though the board never learned the full truth about the blackmail, they were grateful that Mr. Okafor's leadership had guided the company through its darkest hour. In a final, unpredictable twist, Mr. Okafor convened a private meeting with Ifeoma at a discreet office near Victoria Island. For the first time, he opened up about his inner conflicts. "I know I can never live openly the way I might want," he told her gently, "but I also realize I can't keep running from myself. You taught me that there is space for acceptance, even if it's only with a few trusted people." "I'm grateful." Ifeoma nodded, the hush money now an afterthought. She had already channeled a portion of it into a foundation that provided scholarships for underprivileged girls in eastern Nigeria, quietly hoping to ease her conscience. "The future is yours to shape, sir," she said with a soft smile. "Live it in a way that feels true to you, even if only in small doses. And know you have a friend who supports you." They parted with a mutual respect that transcended their earlier boss-secretary dynamic. The entire saga had changed them both. Amid tragedy and scandal, they had found a peculiar kinship, forged in the crucible of secrecy and danger. And for once, Mr. Okafor felt a sliver of peace, aware that true freedom might be elusive, but human connection offered a kind of refuge. Back at the hospital for a routine checkup, he glanced at his reflection in a hallway mirror, a man healing from burns, but also from the internal scars of a double life. He touched the bandages on his arm and murmured a quiet prayer for strength. In time, the company thrived again, and rumors of any strangeness around Mr. Okafor remained unsubstantiated. Ifeoma moved on as well, employing her newly gained resources to uplift her family and community, refusing to let guilt overshadow what good she could do. Thus, in a confluence of African resilience, unwavering loyalty, and professional resolve, the story found its closure. No sensational headlines ripped Mr. Okafor's reputation apart. No further tragedies befell Maduko Innovations. For everyone involved, it was a lesson in the fragile interplay between private truth and public image, a reminder that within Africa's modern corporate landscape, secrets can spark catastrophe, but loyalty and courage can rewrite even the darkest script into something approaching redemption. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.